It's been a month. Uro's been banned, Field of the Dead has been banned. What are the decks that have risen to the top? What do you need to be prepared for in today's modern metagame? That is what we're going to talk about today. Hey everyone, this is Nikachu, Merfolk Master, and you know what? The dust has settled, and I think we now have seen what our metagame looks like. When we look back on February, everything was sort of up in the air. We didn't know exactly what the metagame was moving towards. People were just trying to do their own thing, and the metagame was all over the place. I mean, you could literally play against anything. You still can more or less today, but I think the open events are really showing what the best decks are. So let us talk about that. We are going to start off with number 10, and basically, you know what? Number 10 could have been a multitude of different types of decks, but I'm going to go with Dredge. There isn't a super necessity to be playing with Graveyard Hate in the current modern metagame. If we look at these lists, I mean, it's not a metagame where you need to be attacking the graveyard for the most part. So if people are going to be left off guard with down on their Graveyard Hate, I mean, Dredge is going to be one of the most explosive, dangerous, like free win decks that you could possibly be playing right now. But like I said, you know, Dredge is one of many different decks that I think could be filtered in this number 10 slot. I would say like things like Eldrazi Tron. You could even put an argument that Mill could possibly be in this slot. A lot of decks that are close, a lot of people always ask me, Nikachu, what about this deck? What about that deck? This is just the top 10 decks to be. I can't fit all of them, and they're really close, but I'm going to give it to Dredge. This is still probably the premier non-interactive aggro deck that you are definitely, that's very dangerous, always got to be on a lookout for it because it's one of the more dangerous decks in the modern metagame. Moving on to number 9, Death and Taxes. Now, Death and Taxes had a huge boost when Spider Space ended up winning the Mana Trader Series first place, huge field, and not with just any Death and Taxes list. We're going with the Yorion Taxes list. Some people are on the fence. Nikachu, do you play Yorion? Do you play without Yorion? And you know what? Spider Space says, yes, let's play with Yorion. It is a free card in your sideboard, has pretty good synergy with the deck. If you blink the Stoneforge Mystic, you blink a Batterskull with the Germ Token dead, it's going to come back into play with the Germ Token. You're going to get more triggers with your Flicker Wisp. So there is some decent synergy with the Yorion, and it's a flyer, so you got some evasion, which I think Death and Taxes basically need. I mean, it is a deck of Grizzly Bears. It's nice to have a 4-power flyer in that sort of deck. I cannot explain why it is reasonably positioned right now, but a lot of people have a lot of not only confidence but success. It is putting up results, not in huge numbers, but enough that you have to be prepared for it. Make sure that you're not going to get prisoned out by that creature prison deck. All right, let's move on to number 8, and might set the theme for the rest of this list. We're looking at Jund. Jund, I'm talking just normal Jund. There's not only a lot of people playing Jund, but it is putting up numbers. Creature removal might be the thing right now. That is, or just like interaction. Between the Death Shadow list, we're talking the Burn list, Heliod, Prowess, control decks. You gotta be going interacting with them, because if you don't, you could get steamrolled. And anyway, so Jund also utilizing new cards. I'm seeing more variations utilizing Seasoned Pyromancer, so they're sort of getting with the times. And don't forget, Tarmogoyf is still good. Yes, it's being reprinted a million times. It's down to 30 bucks, but it is still good. Still super strong, singular beater in the modern metagame. I think you have to have your eyes on the Jund players, because their time sort of has come right now, and they have enough card advantage between the Seasoned Pyromancer, between sometimes Croxa, depending if they're playing with it, and also Ren and 6, that it's actually a lethal weapon. And you have to be prepared for attrition in today's modern metagame. Moving on, number 7, and that is Burn. So Burn still doing pretty well. You know, just going with their own plan. It helps that Death Shadow is a pretty popular deck right now. And for that reason, I mean, it's a close matchup. You got to be careful. Because if you do all the work yourself as the Burn player, I mean, the Death Shadow player will just finish you off. But if you're careful, let the Death Shadow player lose their life total. Let them go down low, and then you swing in with your burn spells and finish them off. That is a very interesting matchup, but the Death Shadow players, they all tell me that burn has the upper hand if they know what they're doing. That is a good spot for burn right now. That's a good spot, especially when you got burn versus prowess. I also think the upper hand is for the burn player, because not only do they have the burn spells, but all their burn spells can also come with an advantage. Kill the creature and burn them at the face with stuff like Searing Blaze, for example. So they've got the tools that they need, not to mention they get to utilize things like Core Firewalker at the same time, gain life, and then if the prowess player tries to interact, well, I mean, they're also gaining you life at the same time. So they've got good tools against a lot of the good matchups, and Tron is coming back. They're not doing as well because there's still some poor matchups up against them. You know, Amulet Titan came back, we're going to talk about that, but Burn is still very dangerous, easy to get into, and has a lot of good matchups in today's modern metagame. Let's move on to number 6, and that is Amulet. Now, the thing about Amulet is it suffered a banning in the form of Field of the Dead. Now, the number one response for almost every player when they get a card banned from their deck is that they usually drop it. And this happened a long time ago. Like when Once Upon a Time got banned out of Amulet, people were like, okay, we're not playing this thing for quite a while. But as the dust settles, as time goes on, people realize the deck is still good. And the moment like Amulet Titan started winning again, people were like, Amulet Titan's still a competitive deck? Always has been. So the deal is, now Amulet Titan's starting to put up some results. People are getting confidence in the archetype again. Because what did you... Okay, you lost Field of the Dead. Pretty big beating. Strong card. Everyone agrees. Amulet Titan stabilizing the battlefield with Field of the Dead was a huge advantage. Gave them a big edge versus the Death Shadow decks, or basically any deck trying to race them on the ground. But they still have such a powerful archetype. Dredge of the Elysian Grove. Ramping into your Titan turn. They have a more consistent turn 3 Titan than ever before in the history of Modern, and still utilizing Valakut the Molten Pinnacle, either shooting down your board or finishing you off. Those Death Shadow players, they have to be so damn careful. If they're not careful with their life total, the Amulet player will just kill them on the spot with Valakut triggers. It's as simple as that. Like, the deck is still super ultra powerful. There's a lot of decks that just can't even beat a Primeval Titan. And you know, Primeval Titan has strangely one of the best games against Burn because they've got so many good chunky blockers, you know, between like a Boreal Grazer, Dredge of the Elysian Grove, the Primeval Titan itself. Between getting the lands to get life gain or put the plant tokens onto the battlefield, stabilizing against the Burn deck, you can copy the life gain lands, gain more life. Amulet Titan's still not only super powerful, but super resilient against a huge variety of decks in the modern metagame. And one thing that has really helped the Amulet decks is that Blood Moon completely receded out of the metagame. Red-Green Pawns is not so big anymore. Rakdos mid-range. Mono-Red Prowess has also receded big time. So Blood Moon is not such a hoser they don't have to worry about. Not to mention that this is the type of deck that can completely outmuscle the Tron decks, can blast through control decks thanks to Cavern of Souls just undermining all of the control magic. Amulet Titan is still one of the best decks in Modern, and I mean, just banning Field of the Dead is not going to slow it down. Moving on to number 5, Tron. And I would say not only Tron, I could give a nod to Eldrazi Tron. Eldrazi Tron super underrated right now. I think Chalice of the Void very well positioned, and we've got people like, you know, the Tunneling Cat. She's just killing it in the leagues right now with Eldrazi Tron. So just a shout out to Eldrazi Tron players out right now. Like, that deck is underrated. Let's talk about normal Tron. Very, very strong. You know what? I really don't have anything to say about what makes it very good or bad. There's certainly decks that will race it. Right now, very popular. So I don't know where its edge is coming in the metagame at the moment, but super popular and still being super successful, very consistently making not only 5-0s, putting up representation in the leagues, but going deep and making top 32s in Modern challenges and other big events. Tron is just Tron. Fucking tower, power plant, mine, have 7 mana, get to 10 mana, Ulamog you. And like, even I can feel sometimes I'm suffering. I got the Spreading Seas, I got the counter spells. Sometimes it's not enough. You know, I Spreading Seas and then they play Oblivion Stone and a few lands later and they blow everything up. They've got the mana again. Tron is like basically a barometer of power. It's gonna keep all those mid-range decks in check, and maybe it's doing well because it eats up the other mid-range decks. Maybe it's doing well because it has enough good matchups. Like it does fine versus Death and Taxes. It does fine. It loves playing against the Jund players. The Jund players just can't stand that thing. You know, beat Jund with one simple trick. Expedition map on turn 1, basically. And between Amulet and Tron in the metagame, it's difficult to beat a deck that's going to be all well-rounded because you got to face the aggro decks. We have a good chunk of mid-range, but we got to beat those big mana decks. So anyway, Tron, one of the better decks that you have to be prepared for in March of 2021. Let's move on to number 4. And this might be a little debatable. People might be like, I don't know about that one, Nikachu. And I'm just going to put this all-around category of blue control. I'm putting blue control as number 4 for one of the decks that you have to beat. And I'm talking like blue-white control, Dimir control, Esper control, blue-red moon, you know, blue moon control. All of this entire umbrella of blue, you know, basically counter spell / sweeper control decks. You got to be prepared for them. Now, it would be super debated. Well, here's the deal. I think the leagues are just flooded with these decks, and they can still have success in the leagues. They're doing very well. But I can't seem to play a league without playing against like 1 to 2 control decks. I think the leagues are still flooded with control players, still trying to tune and figure out what the hell is the right construction for this new like mid-range / aggro / big mana metagame. But here's the deal, and this is where people might disagree. Control is not showing up in the top 32s of the big open events. We've had very large events with like 300, 400 players, a lot of big modern events, and control's not really there to be seen, except through the super proficient pilots. I think Aspiring Spike made like 33rd place in a very large modern open. Then we have TSB Yendrick, who also won first place in a modern challenge. So the masters of control, they're still putting up results, but you know, your average player is not really pulling through at a very high competitive level. But this is the decks to beat video, all right? And that means you still have to be prepared if they are there in a large quantity. And I'm telling you, there is tons of control decks out there, especially in the leagues. I don't know what it looks like on the earlier rounds of all those big modern open events. I know they're not pulling through at the top because the results just aren't there for the last 3 weeks, but they're there, all right? You still can't ignore blue control decks. If you want to, you could. That is a strategy. You know, ignore them, hope you dodge them, and then later on in the events, you might not be seeing them nearly as often because they've been beaten out by all the other aggro decks. But like, that's up to you. I do believe that because there is such a large quantity of control that you still need to be prepared for it. And I put control, number 4, decks to beat. Moving on to number 3, Blue-Red Prowess, also known as Izzet Blitz. But the deal is the deck is super fast, hyper aggressive, and it's just an outright powerful deck. I mean, it's going to have game versus anything. The onus is on you to interact and to prove that you can beat the Izzet Prowess player. And if you can't, you are going to get slaughtered and smashed. Those Prowess creatures, maybe they were just a mistake. Monastery Swiftspear Soulscar Mage, they get so big so quickly. You know, between the really mana efficient removal and, you know, things like Lava Dart, Lightning Bolt, the card advantage through light up the stage, and of course some of the free spells like Manamorphose creates these Prowess creatures to get way big super fast. Not to mention Stormwing Entity on turn 2 through a Manamorphose. That is bullshit. Everyone knows what that's like. That is dumb. And helps dig for answers. I mean, Chalice of the Void isn't even a guaranteed thing against that deck. I mean, either they can look for it quickly on the earlier stages of the game, they can dig for it with light up the stage, they can use Opt, they can also play the Stormwing Entity to scry and look for the answer. I've sometimes played Chalice of the Void and it doesn't even work. They just play like Sprite Dragon and make that thing enormous. I can't compete with it, and then all of a sudden I'm being bombarded by Stormwing Entities at the same time, and Chalice did nothing. Chalice on 1 did nothing. It's amazing how resilient it is and also just how proactive it is, and it's got a lot of answers in itself. So anyway, the deck, very popular for big open events. You're going to save a lot of energy, but also just puts the pressure on the opponent to force them to deal with what you're doing, and as it stands, they're not doing a very good job because the deck is still so fast, strong, and successful. I have it number 3 on my decks to beat in Modern right now. Moving on to number 2. And I'm actually a little bit surprised it's still here, Heliod Company. Now, this is basically our premier 2-card combo deck of Modern. It's not the most reliable combo deck, but is still a combo. You know, you can collect it company into Heliod Suncrowned and Spike Feeder at the same time. Infinite mana. But only infinite, you know, air quotes, because you don't technically have infinite mana on Magic the Gathering Online. In paper you will, and you will get extra edges for that if you are playing paper Magic. But online, I think you can gain basically a life per minute. That may or may not matter depending against the deck you are up against. But it's basically a 2-card combo. But if you need infinite damage, you can still do that with Heliod Suncrowned and Walking Ballista, but you need to hold up the mana so that you're able to give your Walking Ballista lifelink and be able to eventually shoot your opponent to death. I have seen builds right now, they've evolved a little bit to help close out the game. They're playing with Archangel of Thune to basically put infinite counters, but you know, effectively enough counters on your creatures to be able to put your opponent away, just kill them to death. So great idea on their part. So the deck is getting stronger. It's evolving as well, and it's been able to hold up very good results. I would say you would find this deck a lot less in the leagues, but you're going to find this deck more often if you're in the winning bracket of a Modern Open, and is showing up in much larger numbers than usual in the top 32s. The deck has everything. I mean, it's got a lot of tutors, it has a lot of flexibility, and it's running green-white, so it has access to all the best sideboard cards. So anyway, Heliod Company is basically, it's here to stay. It's proven itself. I think enough time has passed. Heliod Company is number 2 for the decks that you have to beat. Now, before we get on to number 1, I would love to thank my sponsor, Mana Traders, the premier place to rent Magic cards online. If there's any of the decks that you want to rent on this top 10 list, you can find them in the description below. And you can support the channel by not only using my Mana Traders link, but also using my coupon code Nikachu. It would help also you get 15% off your first 3 months. Alright, so going on to number 1, I actually think undisputed best deck in Modern right now, Jund Death Shadow. This deck not only is tearing up leagues, you're going to find this in high quantity in the leagues, but you're also going to see it high quantity in the Modern Opens. The deal is, it's just like Jund, who is also on this list. So it appears that the interaction of black, green, and red, very useful right now in the Modern metagame, but it has the aggro finishes. It has some free wins because it just puts a giant death shadow on the battlefield sometimes and obliterates the opponent, you know what I mean? It has access to Scourge of the Skyclaves. And basically, like, there's a billion threats now. We got Death Shadow, Scourge of the Skyclaves, and Tarmogoyf. So basically everything is a bomb, and even if you kill it, they go grab Lurrus from the sideboard. That is so frustrating. The Lurrus is still screwing us over a whole year into since it was printed. So they've got the greatest creature interaction, also with the best hand disruption, so they're not afraid about combo decks, and they have the pressure to kill the opponent, particularly decks like, you know, they'll put the pressure on the Amulet player, they'll put the pressure on the Tron player, because if you give them too much time, then you're just going to die like Jund is going to die to those decks. Jund, by itself, has trouble against those big mana strategies. At least Death Shadow gives themselves some chance to win the game, attack with Team or Battle Rage for victory. It's possible. So they have game against basically every deck while also putting the onus on the opponent to even catch up. It's hard to even catch your breath when you're up against this deck. It's just like, I gotta deal with this big threat. I gotta deal with this big threat. Oh my god, they have another one? I gotta deal with this big threat. Oh my god, they have Lurrus? The thing about this deck is, you could lose the early game, but if you go into the long game, you still have to beat Lurrus. They're going to grab Lurrus, put it into their hand, play Lurrus, get some big creature back from their graveyard, so that it's really hard to even beat them in the long game. And for that matter, I put Jund Death Shadow, undisputed best deck in Modern right now, and the deck that you have to beat. Well, what do you think about my top 10 list? What do you think? Anything that I missed you think was deserved an honorable mention? Let me know in the comments section below. If you like this video, don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe for more, and I will see you in the next one.